Russia is losing Kursk. The Ukrainian armed forces have made significant advances there in the last 24 hours. 3 enemy divisions down. The losses of the Russians are indeed impressive. It's burning and blazing. Ukrainian drones have destroyed several key targets in Russia, which is truly shocking. All of this will be covered later in our broadcast. Hotspot. Right now, the Ukrainian armed forces are continuing a powerful assault in the Kursk region. Z propagandists are panicking, shouting about columns of Ukrainian equipment approaching Kursk. Look at where our warriors are advancing now and how the war is going. It's advancing deep into the territory of Russia. Russian propagandists are in a frenzy as the Ukrainian armed forces have launched an offensive in the Kursk region south of Sudzha.
So today we have, it turns out again, our neighbors have launched a wave of counteroffensive against the enemy.
A grouped column of 400 people allegedly set out on February 6th from the village of Makhnovka in the Sudzha district, along the highway towards the Belovsky district. As of noon, it was reported that fighting was ongoing. This is not the first offensive by the Ukrainian Defense Forces in the Kursk direction. And apparently this tactic of periodic breakthroughs by Russian forces is effective.
When talking about the losses of the Russian troops on the territory of our country or on the territory of the Russian Federation at the Kursk front, the question always arises, where is it? Where did that army go? The one that was stationed at our borders in 1922 and attacked us on February 24th. That army, that group is no longer there. And it was precisely this group that was destroyed by the armed forces of Ukraine, the defense forces.
According to the General Staff of Ukraine, over the 6 months of fighting in the Kursk region, the total losses of the Russian occupiers have amounted to about 40,000 people. Of these, more than 16,000 soldiers have been killed. The Kursk operation has been ongoing for 6 months now. It was supposed to prevent a new enemy offensive in the Sumy and Kharkiv regions and force the Russian occupiers to redeploy significant resources in the Kursk region, weakening their positions on other fronts.
On all sections of the front, especially where intense fighting is taking place. This is precisely the Donetsk agglomeration, let's call it that conditionally, the Donetsk direction. And accordingly, the Kursk front forced... The Putin regime is turning to North Korea for help with their little donut.
However, even the presence of North Korean soldiers didn't save them. Russians? Now, the enemy forces have 2 options on the battlefield. Either death or captivity. But soldiers are not the only thing that the North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un decided to test in the war with Ukraine. In the last few weeks, Russian troops have launched at least 20 North Korean missiles onto the territory of Ukraine. They were 50 to 100 meters more accurate than the missiles launched over the past year.
For the North Koreans, this is really a real opportunity today, not just on a training ground, but in the realities of modern warfare, real combat. To conduct the studied use of a particular weapon, that's exactly what's happening. So it's quite likely that the data being reported in the media today may correspond to reality.
For their aggression, the Russians are getting the response they deserve. Ukrainian drones struck the Primorsko-Akhtarsky airfield in the Krasnodar region last night. From there, Russian troops are attacking Ukraine with Shaheds. Hits and explosions in the target area have been confirmed, and a fire broke out. The results of the defeat are being clarified. It was also restless in Volgograd last night. After the attack by Ukrainian drones on February 3rd and January 31st, 2025, on one of the largest oil refineries in Russia, local residents and journalists have been banned from filming the arrivals and writing about their consequences. However, whether you write or not, the attacks continue, and so do the consequences.
Without fuel, the tank won't move. If it doesn't engage in battle, the vehicles won't be able to operate. Accordingly, everything that is happening with Russian oil refineries, this is not just damage to the production itself, it's a disruption of entire logistics routes, including those that operate solely for the armed forces of the Russian Federation, for Russia's aggression against Ukraine. Accordingly, this is something that works against the economy of the Russian Federation, which, having received such breaches on the oil ship, she can no longer fully receive the benefits, the financial resources, including those it was counting on to continue its aggression against Ukraine.
The Pokrovsk direction remains complicated. The occupiers are making attempts to advance in the Kharkiv direction. However, the defense forces continue to hold off the enemy's assaults and do not allow them to break through.
-3 enemy divisions,
The armed forces of Ukraine rolled over the Russians, breaking through their defenses. Defensive losses of the occupiers, and what awaits them at the front? Next in the story, the Russian army has been suffering huge losses in recent months, the highest in almost 3 years of full-scale invasion.
The total losses, according to our estimates, have exceeded 434,000 personnel. The very warehouse of ammunition. Of these, approximately 150,000 are dead.
According to the latest report from the Institute for the Study of War, the Russians have lost nearly 100,000 people in just the past 2 months.
Russian troops lost 48,240 people. More than 3 Russian motorized rifle divisions in January 2025, making January the second largest month. Losses. The available data. This indicates that Russian troops were losing 96 people per square kilometer of captured territory. The Ukrainian Ministry of Defense reported that Russian troops lost 48,670 soldiers in December 2024, their highest monthly loss figure since the beginning of the full-scale invasion.
According to the BBC, the highest percentage of the dead is among newly mobilized volunteers.
The largest share, 23% of all the casualties we have identified, are volunteers, meaning those who signed a contract after the start of the full-scale invasion. We also categorize those who signed a contract to avoid criminal punishment. A little less than 17% of all known dead are prisoners, already convicted individuals who went to the front from correctional colonies. Another 12% of the dead were mobilized, and another 17% are regular military personnel.
But the problem is not only in training, but also in the lack of military equipment.
Bright evidence of this is the assaults using still Soviet-made vehicles, meaning light transport, buggies, motorcycles, ATVs, but with a minimal amount of heavy armored vehicles.
And in the number of volunteers, to plug the gaps on the front, they literally sent colleagues on crutches into assaults.
Either they were discharged from hospitals or they didn't complete enough treatment and rehabilitation. The so-called colleagues of the battalion. This is a very notable innovation of the Russian army, indicating a severe shortage of personnel.
In light of this, it's impossible not to recall the smirk of the Russian Defense Minister Belousov during Putin's report on the casualties at the front.
We must always remember our comrades in arms who died defending the motherland and our people. Surround their families, their children with constant care. I've said it many times and I'll say it again. Their children are our children. We must never forget about this.
The Russian authorities have deliberately intensified the meat assaults to achieve results before the new US president takes office.
They are trying to solve strategic tasks for themselves. This is the approach to the administrative borders of the Luhansk and Donetsk regions. Moreover, the activation of the Russian offensive is precisely in November, December, and accordingly January. That is, during the election campaign period in the United States, there is already the anticipation of the inauguration of the newly elected President of the United States.
At the same time, experts are confident that the Russians will no longer be able to occupy Ukrainian territories at such a speed, since they have reached large populated areas.
Right now it's Ovyar-Toretsk and accordingly the Pokrovsk direction. These are urbanized areas with very dense city development and the presence of so-called industrial zones with very dense urban development and the presence of so-called industrial zones. Accordingly, fighting in urban conditions is high-intensity combat, which leads to a high casualty rate. Personnel, losses.
And yes, their losses can only increase unless the Russian authorities set aside their bloodthirsty ambitions in favor of common sense.